Welcome to For Such a Time as This, a ministry of New Hope Community Church. I am Pastor James Pittman, your host. Want to get into this issue that made some headlines in 2018. A popular Christian commenter, Andy Stanley, made some comments about the Old Testament as it pertains to the New Testament and how Christians should view the Old Testament. That made quite an uproar, as we shall say. Let's listen to a little bit of his views of the Old Testament as it pertains to we believers.
Because many have lost faith. Many have lost faith because of something about the Bible or in the Bible, the Old Testament in particular. Once they could no longer accept all the historicity of the Old Testament, once they couldn't go along with all the miracles, once somebody poked a hole in the Genesis creation, myth, once all that went away, suddenly their house of cards faith came tumbling down because they were taught it's all true, it's all God's word, and if you find one part that's not true, the whole thing comes tumbling down. Not Christianity. The Bible did not create Christianity. The resurrection.
So you can see it seems that he is somehow insinuating that the creation story in Genesis was a myth and that somehow we Christians should leave the Old Testament behind. I think that's the sense you can get. We up on our Facebook page, we've posted an article in which he is explaining his views, and it seems somewhat dangerous. I've read the article, I've read a few articles, and it seems that's what he's saying, that somehow the Christians of the New Testament should divorce themselves from the Old Testament. No, we don't accept that here for such a time as this. Here's a quote from Mr. Stanley. The new covenant replaced the old one. The covenant established by Jesus retired the covenant God established with the nation of Israel. This is why most Christians don't mind a little bacon with their eggs. Now, he is right in this sense. The covenant that was made with the nation of Israel through Moses bound the nation of Israel to a covenant with God. That is what we refer to as the Old Testament. And so when Jesus comes, dies on the cross, sheds his blood for us, he completes the Old Testament. And thus the new covenant, as we speak of, is now the specific covenant God has with the New Testament church. But in no way, in no fashion, is the Old Testament to be done away with. Let's hear from the authority on this issue. Matthew 5, starting at verse 17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot, will pass from the law until all is accomplished. What does that mean, Jesus? Verse 19. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus himself says he has not abolished the law, but he's come to fulfill it. And yes, we are not bound as the nation of Israel is or was. At no point do we ever say that the Old Testament is not worthy of adherence. And for certain, Genesis and the Adam and Eve and the flood and all that's written in all of the Old Testament, it is true. It's not fable. It's not myth. It is good for consumption because God is who he is, was who he was, and will always be the same God. No changing, no retiring, no divorcing. And so we have to be very careful when dealing with the Old Testament as it pertains to the New Testament. Absolutely, yes, agreed. But at no time are we to divorce ourselves from the Old Testament. Are we to divorce ourselves from the Old Testament God because he is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Thank you for being here for such a time as this. We will continue to bring news from a Christian perspective, for as we say, we do not make the news here for such a time as this. We don't make the news, we just highlight it from a Christian perspective. Thank you, and God bless.